Welcome to TechCrunch TV to a special failure edition. We have two young men here who are particularly distinguished failures. Brian Wong, who is the founder and CEO of Kip, and Roger Dickey, who is the CEO and founder of Mafia Wars. We're at FailCon, guys. So what's the big deal about failure? Why are we all so obsessed with failure these days?
Well, I mean, you hear in things like lean startup and all that sort of literature about how you really want to try to fail as quickly as you can, learn from your failures, etc. To me, it's all about investment. It's about being careful about how you measure your investment in what you do, and you have to, be willing to cut cords quickly if things aren't working. And FailCon just explores a number of different areas where people commonly fail, like user acquisition, hiring, monetizing, things like that.
I think the culture of acceptance of failure in the Valley is paramount to its success over the last 25 years, and I think the way that we call it fail right now is kind of like a mockery too, which is really funny. It's like people are mocking failure, but I think it's failing to success, which is the key part here.
What do you mean mocking failure?
Well, the fact is that it's perceived very differently here. I think externally, outside of San Francisco, when people look at this conference, they'll be like, oh my God, they're talking about their failures. This is ridiculous. But everybody here understands that the reason why this is such a valuable conversation to have is that on the surface, what's always covered are the successes, but very rarely are what is uncovered is what's below the surface, what hasn't succeeded before those successes occurred.
Which of the two of you is a bigger failure?
I wouldn't know, I guess. We're both.
Well, what's your, Brian? Brian,
I mean,
tell the viewers something you've really failed in a massive way.
So I was lucky enough to graduate college early at the age of 18, but then
So you didn't fail at college?
I didn't fail
Where
at
did you go
college.
to college?
At University of British Columbia, which
Probably
may have been a
having
failure.
fun in college.
Yeah, that's probably yeah.
Well, you went to Canada for
Yeah, I went
college.
to
That's
Canada.
a kind of failure.
Kind of a
right?
failure, yeah, exactly. But then the more fail part was the fact that I graduated, moved down to the U.S. to work at a company that we all know now as Dig, and then got laid off.
The
5 months
epitome of
after.
failure, yeah.
So I got laid off 5 months after. So I was there all of from January to May. And it was not an internship. It was a full-time job, and I ended up losing it after 5 months.
Roger, beat working at Dig as failure.
Okay, I can absolutely beat that. So when the Facebook platform launched in 2007, my friend and I were like, holy shit, this is going to be huge. Facebook's huge. People are going to jump on these apps like crazy. We knew that would work well, but we weren't sure what apps to make. So we actually built 16 apps that completely failed before we built something that took off.
On purpose?
No, we were trying to succeed every time. We'd spend about 2 or 3 days on each application and just code from, when we woke up to when we went to bed. But none of the apps worked. We were unwilling to copy anybody. We were trying to be fully original and leverage the Facebook platform for what it was meant for. But as it turned out, the way to make the most money on Facebook was to just port single-player games over or make dating applications. And that's not what we were doing.
How much time did you spend on Mafia Wars?
Mafia Wars, the initial version took about 4 or 5 days to make.
Okay, so it was the same amount of time. Interesting.
Pretty quick.
Who are your paragons of failure? Who do you look up to as figures who have failed with spectacular success?
Wasn't it Thomas Edison that tried like 400 versions of the light bulb before he came up with the right one? Yeah, and the Wright brothers were one of them too. Yeah, so Wright brothers and Thomas Edison. I mean, Thomas Edison, he's famous for obviously what he's invented in electricity and the light bulb, but he came up with like several hundred versions that failed before he came up with the right one. And then the Wright brothers, of course, the thing that was very interesting about them is they looked at, I think there's a documentary that looked at the two major figures in that period of history that was trying to aim for manned flight. And they were the least likely to succeed because they had the least resources, but they had the most drive. And the two brothers were able to create this out of massive failures, which almost killed them. I mean, it's well documented.
Well, Roger, let's have some more contemporary ones.
Contemporary, okay.
Well, Henry Ford,
Yeah.
Edison, but what about some modern contemporary failures who are at least alive or recently alive, even last week or the week before?
Well,
Steve Jobs, I think he's aiming for, right?
Well, Steve Jobs, I mean, he was laid off from Apple or whatever, and then he ended up coming back in later. I think there's numerous examples like that. There's also Andrew Mason of Groupon. He had tried to launch The Point, I think, and then that hadn't worked out, or he'd sold it, and then he just tried to do the same thing again, roughly, because he really knew that would work. Also, somebody I most recently worked for, Mark Pincus, I have an incredible amount of respect for Mark, given his track record of startups he tried and how he really didn't succeed succeed on a massive scale until he was past 40. And a lot of people say, once you're past 30 or so, you have much less opportunity as an entrepreneur. But I think Mark is a really good counterexample to that. Zynga being his fourth business, which has now made him a billionaire.
What advice would you give entrepreneurs or failed entrepreneurs who are watching this on TechCrunch about bouncing back from failure? Because after all, it's one thing to fail, it's quite another to keep on bouncing back and reinventing yourself, your product, your company.
Well, I think the first step is to figure out if you should be an entrepreneur or not. And assuming you feel like you should be, you feel like you have what it takes to handle high amounts of risk and large amounts of failure, even on a minute basis. Like I launched this little feature and it failed for my product. If you really have what it takes to raise funding, attract technical talent, etc., then really it's just a matter, when it comes to bouncing back, it's just a matter of finding the right thing to do and really, aggressively surrounding yourself with people that can give you good feedback on ideas, really looking at markets, not ideas you get excited about, like, wouldn't this be cool, is obviously the wrong reason to build a product. There's 100 million people that want this is the right reason to build a product. So just finding that and building your light at the end of the tunnel is the best way I've bounced back.
What about mental resilience, though? Isn't that the core of dealing with failure?
100% agree. And I think one of the main ways to bounce back is actually not even to perceive it as failure in the first place. And a lot of what we see, whatever we may have had as a setback, is more of a learning opportunity. And 100%, and I think this was J.K. Rowling who spoke about this in her commencement speech in like Oxford or something, was that failure was the ultimate rebirth for her. And in fact, her speech is very well known for addressing failure as a huge part of what was driving her towards creating what a massive success Harry Potter was. But the fact of the matter is that you have nothing to lose. You're naked when you've failed or when you have done something that you realize that it was an ultimate learning opportunity. And you use that, and the only way you can succeed and will do justice to what you just did is to make it right and to learn from it. And if you don't learn from it, you're doing a disservice to yourself. You are completely losing the opportunity that you had to see what you may have fallen on yourself on, and how you can make that right.
Yeah, and I would add to that, J.K. Rowling was also past 40 when she launched the Harry Potter series, right? So I mean, the value behind looking at that is these people, J.K. Rowling, Mark Pincus, tried their whole life and finally found something that worked. And really, it's about persistence. That's how you ultimately succeed off of your failures.
You're both young, successful failures or failed successes. But of course, America is struggling to reinvent itself. There are many Americans outside Silicon Valley who aren't even familiar with the whole discourse around failure. How can we teach America, we meaning Silicon Valley, how can we teach America and indeed the world to fail successfully?
Well, I think on an individual basis, it's a question of what motivates people. For me, what motivates is to see examples of spectacular successes and the behind the scenes, the kind of thing you see for celebrities, where it's like, celebrities are like us too. I think some magazine has that as a section where there's celebrities checking out at the supermarket, and it's like, really, these people are, celebrities, successful entrepreneurs are just regular people who really persisted. And luck's obviously an aspect, but persistence and being comfortable with failure, as all successful people are, is key.
And to quote Steve, you have when you're going to die, you realize what you really have. When you live that way, and I know this is extreme, of course, but the way that I think is best to help convey this message to the rest of the country is, what is the worst that could happen? Right? Most of the time when we think of doing something, we put up a lot of mental barriers that become a very dumb reason not to do. And you only realize that after the fact, and when you actually hear yourself telling yourself why you didn't do that in the first place, you're like, that was a dumb reason. And so you have to think about, like, what is the worst that could happen if you went and pursued this? And I always think about the thing as, like, do now, ask for forgiveness later. If you fuck up, you fuck up, and then, obviously there's a reason to apologize later, but at least you could live with yourself that you tried and you had done it in the first place. And if the regret of not doing it is greater than doing it, then you should do it.
And finally, since you've been so open with your failures, Tell TechCrunch, Brian, a little bit about what Kip's up to.
So Keep is a mobile rewards network. Essentially, when you level up in any game that you love that's integrated with Keep, you can get a real reward. So imagine leveling up in Mega Jump, which is a game that we have, and getting a free latte from the Starbucks across the street. So it's leveraging achievement moments in games to create affinity with brands.
It sounds like a spectacular failure.
Thank you.
And Roger, what's your latest failure?
I left Dickey about 2 months ago, and I'm spinning up a new venture. We don't really know what it's going to be yet,
But you know it's going to fail, right?
We know at least initially. Well, we've already failed because we've taken 2 months to find an idea. So that's
And what's it called?
frustrating
What's
us.
the name of this failure?
We're currently called Product X because we don't know what it's going to be.
Well, Roger and Brian, two of the youngest and most attractive failures I've met. Thank you so much for appearing on TechCrunch TV.
Thanks, Andrew.
Absolutely.